So there's a team of us. I don't know if we all introduce ourselves first, but I'm starting off the presentation, and I'm Bronwyn Simpson. So I'm one of the researchers at the university and with an OT background. Do you want to say hi, Bridget and Michelle, or introduce yourselves when we get to you?
Sure, we might as well introduce ourselves now. Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm calling in from the lands of the Gadigal people here in Sydney. I lead a team of research on inclusive disaster risk reduction. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak with everyone online today. And I'm especially excited, John Green, that you're here today too, because now I'm really keen to have your voice in today's discussion. So looking forward to chatting today. Over to you, Bridget.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Bridget McGuire, joining from Ngunnawal country in Canberra. I've just started my PhD under Michelle's supervision and super excited to be working on this project alongside that.
And Jade's here too. Jade, I wonder if you want to just pop in and say hi too.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jade Chan. I'm a health economist working with Michelle and Bronwyn and Bridget. Nice to be here today.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the background and the journey so far with this incredible program and tool and resource called Person-Centered Emergency Preparedness, which is a little mouthful, so we're going to say P-CEP, which is the new acronym for you guys today. So we'll start with a little bit of a background of what's happened so far, how we developed the project and designed it, and then also where we're at now and where you might fit in. So firstly, just acknowledging the country and the traditional owners of the countries of the land that we've done this work in. Mostly we've been in Sydney on Gadigal land, but the program has been across Australia, across the many lands, and we acknowledge those traditional owners. So we're going to talk a bit about emergency preparedness and then talk about disability inclusive disaster risk reduction, which is an approach that's being used internationally, before talking then about how the P-CEP is kind of designed and how it fits into that. We're then going to talk about where we're at now, which includes a survey, which we would love you to be involved in. So we'll talk about the survey and why you might want to do that. Next steps and where you can get some training. Some reflections from Jade and Alex about their journeys so far in this, if they're happy to share from the course they've done. And then plenty of time for discussion. So we'll try to make this very applied and practical. But as a bit of a background, this is what we knew and what the problem is from the literature and from our experience with emergencies and disasters. So we know that preparing for emergencies is a shared responsibility, and there's lots of different people involved that have different responsibilities. So there are emergency planners and the government and councils that are involved, but also individuals have that responsibility too. And to that end, everyone should have an emergency plan. Everyone's situation and context is different, and the different risks that we face are different. So that's going to be tailored. It's not like the government's just going to hand us this recipe book and go, here we go, this is how we all deal with emergencies. It very much is tailored to individual needs. So that's everyone, but people with a disability face particular risks during disasters. So there may be specific needs that people with disability of various forms are going to need to take into account, potentially different supports, different challenges to evacuation, all sorts of things. And none of that will be a surprise to you. And also it won't be a surprise that people with disability are really used to thinking and planning and problem solving. So it's not just that it's complex, but that people with disability come to this with a lot of experience in having to work through contingency plans and, you know, coordinate lots of different supports and people. So that's a real capability. And that people with disabilities can prepare for emergencies. You know, they're not, we don't want to come to this with a real vulnerability approach. We're thinking about capabilities, and the whole basis of this is that we know people with disability can be involved and can prepare for emergencies. Even people with, say, very significant cognitive impairment can and should be involved and have some control and choice in that planning. But emergency planning tools don't didn't take the needs of people with disability into account. They're very generic, and they're assuming everyone could drive or walk away, or, you know, that they weren't sort of taking into account those specific needs. And local government and emergency personnel, as good as their intentions are, just didn't really know how to best support people with disability. So that was kind of the impetus for the project that particularly Michelle embarked on. And from all that, she knew that solutions to those problems needed to involve people with disability as the very centre of this process and their supporters. Also to then bring in those other stakeholders, emergency personnel, local government, and bring them together so they can have that discussion. The solution needs to have every person and their unique needs at the centre. So it's got to be person-centred. And that's where that P-CEP part of P-CEP comes from, that it's not a textbook or recipe book approach. It's based around an individual, and it's very individualised. And then the solution needs to consider what people can do and not just their vulnerabilities. It needs to think about capabilities. It needs to be really practical. Any solution it cannot be theoretical or too complicated. It needs to be very practical steps that someone can take and involve really practical, tangible tools that people can use. So that's kind of the background of, you know, what Michelle and others were bearing in mind as they designed this program. So I'm going to hand over to Michelle to talk about the bit of a timeline of what happened then since 2015 to now.
Thanks, Bronwyn. And for those of you, because there are some people on the line, I think, who were around when in the early days of starting this disability inclusive disaster risk reduction work, and I'm going to unpack that DIDRR acronym a little bit. It's a term that's been used outside of Australia, and we wanted to make sure it was going to be well known, understood, and utilized inside Australia to make sure that we're sort of, I guess, meeting our obligations under two things. One, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 11, that says people with disability have the right to safety and protection in times of disaster, but also the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which might be new to people from the disability sector. So just for your awareness, the Sendai Framework is the international framework that all nations have agreed to. And for the first time ever in 2015, that framework mentioned for the first time people with disability, their rights and their legitimate roles in disaster risk reduction. And so that's a pretty powerful timeline, the start of the work here in Australia and the requirements from an international perspective. But the problem we had when we started this work in Australia was we had these great, very cumbersome principles: accessibility, participation, collaboration, and non-discrimination, and variations of those terms, which I'm sure that all disability advocates are very familiar with. But for the emergency sector, for them trying to think about how do I translate those principles into practical actions, as Bronwyn mentioned, and practical tips and strategies and ways of working, that was not so feasible for them, or very understandable. So on the next slide, you'll see that time has passed, and in 2021, there was an important marker, and that was the impact that this research started making. And I must say, the cascading impact of multiple disasters had something to do with that too. We had not only the bushfires of 2019-20, but we had the COVID pandemic, followed by floods before and after that time period. So there was a lot of advocacy that had been really stepping up into this space around 2019-20 and the height of the bushfires in particular. But in 2021, there's major legislative change. So in case you're not aware, I'll just highlight two important things for you to know about, because this is critical in your advocacy work. One, the National Disability Insurance Scheme Quality and Safeguarding Commission made a legislative amendment on November 15th, 2021. So it took effect in 2022, and it requires all people providing NDIS services to meet the standards for disaster and emergency management planning. They need to do two things: make sure that they have plans for service continuity, and they need to make sure that that intersects effectively with the individual support plans of the people they provide services to. So if you're not aware of that, talk to your provider about what they do or do not yet know about their new standards and their new requirements. But the other thing that's really important for those of you who don't or maybe don't receive NDIS services is that we had a major change when with our new Australia's Disability Strategy, so the 2021 to 2031 strategy, for the first time ever, mentions inclusive emergency management and disaster recovery planning. So that's really important because that's everyone else. And so it's really a great opportunity with these two new pieces and requirements for everyone to now step up and play their part. And so that includes each of us as individuals, but it includes the services that support them, government and emergency services sector. I think we'll go to the next slide and jump ahead for a second to say that how did we get there? We got there through a lot of co-design and iterative stages of developing tools that people could actually use. Our whole method and our madness was to make sure we were developing tools that all the different stakeholders could use effectively. So bringing them together on language and practices and ways of doing things that would make that much simpler for people to start working together, because these groups didn't traditionally work together. And those of you with disability in the room may also appreciate very well that you have not been invited to the table to talk about disaster risk reduction. And now just before everyone, as everyone was logging on, John Green was mentioning that he's on the disaster or the emergency management planning committee for his community up around the Mid-North Coast. So it's really exciting to see the big changes and the practical changes that are happening from a policy and at a practice level. But what's on the screen right now is a link to the website, www.collaboratingforinclusion.org, and it's a number 4, inclusion.org. That's the place where we put all of the tools that we co-design and build so that you can access, use them, share them, get involved. So please don't hesitate to have a play around that website. Find tools, videos, infographics, case studies, you name it, you'll find it there. And have a go with it and let us know what you think and how you're using it in practice. On the next slide, I just want to nut it out to what have we learned in all this time, because it was a lot of work and it's a lot of tools, as you'll see when you go to the website. You'll be hopefully slightly overwhelmed by the amount of tools that are there, but also pleased by the amount of energy and effort that so many people, thousands and thousands of people now, have put into building those tools, giving them lots of road testing and improving them over time. But really what we're learning is that it boils down to two things. One, all of us, disabled or not, need a person-centered emergency preparedness plan that's tailored to our unique support needs and situation. And so for some of us, that's going to be more complex and require layers and layers of negotiating with the people who provide services and supports to us. And for other people, it might be a simple and straightforward conversation and everything in between. But the capability wheel, the person-centered emergency preparedness capability wheel, we'll talk about that in a minute to give some background on how we got to that making of a person-centered plan. So it really starts with us and making a plan, but that's only goes so far. If there are continued barriers or challenges that you have that keep you at risk in an emergency situation. And so it might be, for example, that you have a vehicle but need someone to drive it and you're separated from them during an emergency. So transport and access to transport in an evacuation is going to be a systematic barrier or systemic barrier that you might experience. So we need to start looking at what can our community organizations and services and how can we mobilize at that community level with the people who provide routine care and support with us in the community, and that we provide support and services too to help kind of organize the delivery of more effective services. But then there still may be gaps, and that's where we need to make sure that our community level emergency plans take into account persistent barriers for people that make sure everyone in the community is safe, including people with disability who have additional and extra support needs that local government needs to plan around. So on the left side of that screen is a picture of the person-centered emergency preparedness. That's the tool or the suite of tools that helps us start making the plan at the individual level and helps us to kind of communicate and navigate that with all of the people who provide support to us, whether that's formal or informal support. And on the right side of that screen, you'll see the Disability Inclusive Emergency Planning, or DIEP, forums. That's been our approach to bringing stakeholders together at the community level and kind of activating that advocacy and that change process from like-minded people who are coming together across those stakeholder groups to have those conversations. If you will, it's kind of keeping that mutual accountability up for each of us to persist and keep motivated to make our plans better over time, but also to make sure the conversation doesn't stop there, that it gets embedded back into local government planning and processes and everything in between. All of those services that provide networked linkages throughout our communities need to be part of that conversation over time. So that was a lot of background to where we've come so far. Now, I'll just say a few more things to backtrack about the person-centered emergency preparedness, because I think we'll feature the rest of our conversation today around P-CEP. And go from there. On the next slide, what you'll see is we have a bit of a P-CEP timeline. So this is a tool. When we started that work in 2015, one of the big problems was we made a recommendation to emergency managers at the time that said, people with disability need tools so that they can self-assess their capability, their preparedness level, their capability, and their support needs. And then they need tools that will help them make a tailored plan that's going to work for them. So we made that recommendation on the heels of our very first project in New South Wales, but there were no tools anywhere in the world for that to happen. So we committed to developing those tools. And we've really been on a long journey of improving those tools over time. At the top of that screen, there's a picture, an image of one of our peer leaders actually pointing at the scale. It's a preparedness scale, and you'll see it a little later on a slide today. And she's actually pointing to number 3, her current level of preparedness on that scale. And on the rest of the timeline, you'll see our capability wheel, and we'll blow that up in just a minute to show you what's inside that. But it was all about trying to figure out what needed to go inside a tool. What did people need to be thinking about to personalize preparedness for themselves? So we set about co-designing and testing it. And John Green, if I can point out, is one of the earliest testers of that tool and the earliest supporters in our co-design. So thanks, John. And that work led to an award for the P-CEP resource that we built together in those early days. Now, we've gone through a process of working increasingly with disability advocates, and some of our champions have been from Queenslanders with Disability Network, who have an amazing networked connection of peer leadership and peer support. And that really strengthened our approach because it meant that we could rely on quite a large number. I think we've reached through their member networks quite rapidly, over 300 people straight away, to get input into that tool. And that led to the development and tailoring of that original P-CEP into a workbook. What we learned was people wanted this workbook to make it a little bit that much more practical and that much more person-focused. So we've been spending a lot of time developing education, training, and facilitation for other people, whether it's an individual themselves or someone else who works with people with disability who wants to help facilitate that preparedness and thinking process that's required to make a plan. And now we're kind of in 2023, we're at the stage where we're continuing to evaluate our training programs. One of them is a certificate course now in P-CEP at the University of Sydney, which we'll share more information if those of you who are interested want to get involved in that. But we're also developing what we're calling P-CEP Connect. So communities of practice are emerging now, not just in New South Wales, but around other parts of Australia, as we get people kind of aware, capable, and prepared, P-CEP trained up, and kind of championing this whole approach through the community, and using, where disability advocates are concerned, using their strong advocacy skills to keep that kind of on the radar of government, if you will. So stay tuned for more about P-CEP Connect as we kind of grow the community of practice also outside of the training program. On the next slide, I feel like we could probably jump a couple of slides, but we'll do this one for a minute. On the left is the capability framework, and it just has these 8 elements that I'd love you to contemplate when you think about preparedness planning. I'm not sure how big we can make that on the screen, but I'll tell you what those capability elements are. The top 3 are living situation, social connectedness, and transportation. So if we think about that, those are things that the research literature says we all need to think really strongly about in making a disaster risk reduction plan to keep ourselves safe. So where we live and our exposure to disaster risk, whether we live in a unit that's on the 6th or higher floor, and when the power goes out, it's the lift that's going to stop us from evacuating that building, or whether we live in a bushfire area and we kind of are at risk of ember attacks and we need to think about our eaves and cleaning our property and keeping things tidy. But it also relates to things like who do we live close to, or whether we live regionally and far, or whether we live close to a river that floods on a frequent basis. So our living situation and the toolkit that we have kind of get you thinking about all the dynamic things you need to think about in your living situation to think about what's your risk and what can I do about it. Social connectedness is another really critical one. Now, I'll take you just on a quick journey with that one. So one thing we always say is the person standing next to you in a disaster is your first responder. Don't wait for emergency services to tell you what to do. It's actually our social networks that are really important and who we're connected to. So knowing your neighbor and all of those campaigns that emergency service personnel have put out for a very long time are really important things. But sometimes we find that people with disability might be connected through online communities and not geographically close to the key people who are in their support networks. So there might be a number of ways or reasons that social connectedness can become either an enabler or a barrier in a disaster. And then transportation. My example earlier is you might have a car, but you might need someone to drive it, or you might not have a vehicle to evacuate when an evacuation is called, or you might be sheltering in place and have no way of getting supplies to you. So transportation also has a dynamic number of features. Those are things we all need to think about, and then people with disability might have extra things on top that they need to consider. The ones at the bottom were specifically from our research and field testing with people with disability, the services that support them, and emergency personnel to identify the other areas that were never thought about before this in Australia or elsewhere that we needed to start thinking about. So the bottom elements briefly are assistance animals, but please add pets, companion animals, livestock, and any other furry or not so furry thing that you love and care for, because our animals, whether they support us or we support them, are the thing that will actually put us at risk if we don't have a plan for them, because we'll be thinking about them in an emergency. Communication, and that's all about how we get, give, receive, and understand information, but it's also who we trust to get that information from. And for emergency services, whether that information is even accessible to us in language we can understand and use. Personal support is obviously the people that support you, and over from that is assistive technology, and that might be the equipment and the tools that supports you. And as you know, those two things are often interrelated, so people might support you to do a lift and transfer, for example. And the last one there at the bottom of that oval is management of health. And we mean not just medicines, but we mean medical supplies and equipment and sterilization and health and diet and all of the things you need to think about to be healthy, well, and safe. So that's the capability wheel, and that is really the centerpiece of the person-centered emergency preparedness process. And I'm really pleased to say that we've got emergency personnel rethinking the starting point for disaster risk reduction and community engagement. On the far right of that diagram, there's kind of this 4-step P-CEP process. And steps 2 and 3 are what emergency managers do routinely. They help us learn about our disaster risk, and they help us to make a plan. The problem with that is all of us, and those of us with disability, need to do something a step before that. We need to actually self-assess how we get, give, and manage our support needs on a routine daily basis through each element of the capability wheel as a starting point for making an emergency plan that's tailored to us. And then we also needed to add a 4th step and make that 4th step explicit. So the 4th step is about communicating the plan with people who are actually going to be there in a disaster and who can support you, but it also is about advocacy. So advocating for the change when those systemic barriers are going to continue to put you at risk. So together, that's kind of the stepwise process. And the way that we've been working with emergency personnel, and I think we've had great success, is convincing them of the value of the capability wheel and the importance of step 1 and the explicit important nature of step for. And that goes back to what I said earlier about connecting that individual person-centered planning with the community level plans that are designed to keep the whole community safe. In the middle of this diagram, it's just got 3 principles. Preparedness is a process, not a one-time event, so it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to, conjure an idea about a plan and suddenly have a plan the next day. It actually will take time for all of us to develop a personal plan, and that's okay. I think in the past there was a lot of pressure that know about your risk, make a plan, and it was quite stressful and can be confronting for people, but it's okay to take time to make your plan and to do it well, and to improve that plan as your support needs and life situation changes over time. So we need to revisit it and rethink about it too. Principle number 2 is probably the most important one. People are the experts in their lives, so planning needs to start with them. People shouldn't really be telling us how to make a plan. We should be co-creating that plan together with people who have skills, abilities, knowledge that we need, but actually driving it from how we live our lives and what's important to us and what we know needs to happen to keep us safe. And then the third principle that's from my perspective, one of the change makers in the P-CEP tool is that if we do this process right, if we let people with disability be at the center and drive the process, and if we respond with our expertise in ways that help them to understand the risk and make plans, and we start improving how we communicate information and how we make it accessible, then what it naturally does is it brings people together who don't normally work together to really learn about better ways to make emergency management more inclusive. And I think that's what our research is really showing, and we're really excited about the journey and the outcomes to date. I think, Bronwyn, that's probably enough of me. We can probably skip over some of the tools, the specific tools, but to let people know that some of these tools are out there to have a look more closely, I suppose, from this overview today. Now, we don't want to skip over you, though, John, because I would love to stop here for a moment and just reflect back. John, I don't know if you can remember back to this moment. And we were having these conversations before we had pictures for the capability wheel. We just had words, if you remember back at that time, on a piece of paper in a circular sort of format. And John, do you remember you circled assistive technology, management of health and living situation, not because that was the only things you were worried about, but those were your priority areas for emergency planning. Can I turn it to you, John, for a moment to reflect?
Yeah, assistive technology for me was pretty important because I haven't got a lot of hand movement, and the stuff I have, use computers, and that is all the system technology. So at my house here, I have a generator set up. So if electricity goes off, I can run my house on a generator and keep everything going. But yeah, it was a big time back then. It's a long time ago now.
It was, John. And I remember one of the things that you told me back then was a priority for you was having, if you had to evacuate, making sure you had an alternating air mattress accessible and available to you. That was one of the things that you didn't want to evacuate without.
Yeah, no, having electricity is such a big thing for people with electrical beds and all our electrical system stuff, like CPAPs, anything else we use like that. It was a major thing for me if I got evacuated from my house. And so yeah, it was if we had to evacuate from here, we would have to have a generator at the place that is going to support us. And that is, I wouldn't be the only person like that with a spinal injury.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I really appreciate you chiming in and bringing the those early days to life and how the capability wheel is kind of used essentially to have this kind of interactive discussion and really reflecting on what's important in a planning process. So thanks for that, John. We'll skip ahead at this point in the interest of time, if that's okay. On the next slide, it just really says some key things that we've learned about tailoring preparedness. And those are really, take the time up front. Make sure people really are in the driver's seat of self-assessing what they're good at and what they need support for, and the ways they get, give, and receive that support, because that needs to be a starting point for preparedness. Instead of starting from doom and gloom and fire and flood and fear, we can actually start with, oh, actually, we manage a lot of things on a routine basis and navigate lots of inaccessible environments. So let's use that actually as a starting point for making the plan, because that puts you in the expert seat, especially when interacting with government and emergency services and mobilizing resources in your local communities. But don't forget to ask for help from others. Along the way in our research, we've learned a lot about people with disability making do, not asking for help, being quite stoic, getting by. And I suppose one of the messages I'd like to remind people is we all need to ask for help, and we should be reaching out and asking for help and support to make a preparedness plan, to mobilize the things we need, to access funding if that's required. And so I suppose with these requirements underway with the Australian strategy and the changes to the NDIS, we should actually be doing more of that and starting that conversation from wherever we are and with whoever we interact with. Make sure people brainstorm with you and don't tell you what to do, and call them on it when they try. I'm sure you already do that, but that brainstorming together is actually a really, really critical feature that we've learned is a highly valued part of this planning process. And that's actually what keeps people motivated to sustain and continue their planning, even when the going gets a little bit tough and some of the barriers start to come to the surface. It's actually the brainstorming that people value. Don't forget to communicate your plan. In our research, the people who are also really bad at communicating their plans with their support network are our government and emergency services, who make plans for the rest of the community. I find that personally alarming, and my mission is to encourage them to also have plans communicated with their support networks, because while they're out fighting fires and mopping up after floods and saving us, we also want to make sure that their families are safe too. Practice the plan. A lot of service providers have told us in our national surveys and in our interviews that they don't think they can help you to practice a plan. And I would love to hear from you guys today in discussion later about, well, what are some strategies about practicing that plan? Do you find it a turnoff to practice elements or all of an emergency plan? Plans, if they're going to work, really need to be practiced. So I think we need to break down some barriers around people who provide services, perhaps and support in your home, where they're so careful and respectful that they don't even think they can even imagine working with you to figure out ways to practice a plan. So maybe I'll turn that one over to you guys to think about whether and how that might be possible. And then, of course, make the plan a living document. Preparedness is an ongoing process, remember. So Bronwyn, should I turn it back to you at this stage?
Sure. So hopefully you can see there's an impressive array of resources now that have been co-designed and developed with people with disability and in the sector and researched and tested, but we're not under any illusion that that's job done. The website's there, now everyone's prepared. We know that there's also then work that needs to be done to get this to people and help them use it. So part of that is raising awareness about the importance of this area, or even thinking about it as a topic to discuss. Then how to let people know the tools are there, how to use them, supporting people to do that individual risk assessment, knowing what their particular risks are in their context. Then that actual planning, so working through your needs, problem solving, thinking about confronting topics, all of that is actually quite hard to do alone. And we're not assuming that someone's going to just run this completely independently because there's some resources on a website. A lot of this is really helpful done with other people, sharing ideas, hearing their experiences, talking through those difficult or potentially scary topics. And then also we often need other people to provide ongoing motivation, support, follow up. And as Michelle said, this is a living, active kind of plan. It's not something you could just do at a workshop and then tick it off so it's done. So since these tools were developed, and we've continued to refine them, a lot of the project work has been actually how to practically get this to people. So we're going to talk through 3 ways that we've tried to reach people and help them with this process beyond just developing the tools. And the first one is P-CEP peer leadership. So this has been mostly done in Queensland in collaboration with Queenslanders with Disability Network, but it's also been taken into other states. So there's some pictures on the right, and I'll talk through them. At the top is a group of people who are involved in some existing peer support networks. And as Michelle said, QDN has a very strong network of people with disability getting together for general peer support. So they made emergency preparedness and P-CEP part of their regular topic of discussion in their peer support groups. A bunch of those peer leaders then really took this on board and developed sort of additional leadership skills, and are now really running this, training other people, running workshops for people with disability to then know how to use the P-CEP. So they're very much leading this peer support project. So they're reaching lots of other people beyond the peer support groups. They're going to community events, and you can see the numbers sort of from the 22 people that had individual mentoring in P-CEP. They're now reaching 281 people through peer support groups, and nearly 3,000, and that number's probably much more now, and it's hard to estimate, through community events. And at the bottom there's a picture of a woman with a disability in a wheelchair who's talking to SES and other emergency personnel, and I love that she's educating them and talking about and sharing what she has learned through this process. So that P-CEP peer leadership has been a really key part of getting knowledge and awareness out about P-CEP to people who actually had some support with making plans, and also just at least raising some general awareness. And again, people with disability in the very centre and the driver's seat of that program. So hopefully that sort of sparks some interest for you guys. It has expanded out, but you might be involved in peer support through your own networks that you might be interested in, including this topic in some of that peer support too. I'll pass over to Michelle to talk about the certificate course.
So we quickly outstripped our capacity to teach people P-CEP, and especially once the new provisions came into place with the NDIS standards and the Australian Disability Strategy. Momentum increased, and the number of people who were hungry for knowledge about what is P-CEP and how to do it really increased. We thought at first, once we put all these tools out there and made it all available on the website, that it would be super straightforward. People would pick it up, use the tool, put it into practice. But we realized rather quickly that it doesn't quite work that way. The challenge is that service providers in particular, who want to open conversations with you and start the emergency planning conversation, they've actually also been equally left out of emergency management and disaster recovery planning themselves. So they're not up to speed, frankly. So one of the risks you need to think about when you're having conversations with your service provider is you have to go, how planned up is my service provider? How planned up is the organization they work for? And, what level of confidence and comfort do they have in having this conversation? So we realized it was important, first of all, that anyone who might facilitate or enable this kind of conversation with others, including the peer leaders that Bronwyn just spoke about, they need to have a plan themselves. So they need to be aware, capable, prepared, and on their way with a P-CEP journey. That builds confidence. And because we outstripped our capacity to run this as workshops traveling across the country, we decided, what's another way to do this? And, the gift of COVID was putting everything online. So we actually put this fully online after a long period of co-design, early evaluation, and now full evaluation of the online certificate course. This program, called Person-Centered Emergency Preparedness Certificate Course, or a Facilitator Certificate Course, does two things. It brings you together with people from other stakeholder groups. So people with disability learning alongside services and emergency personnel and government all together in the course. To our knowledge, the first in the world that actually brings us all together to learn and work together and problem solve. That's been really exciting because it's really breaking down stigma and discrimination and other barriers that people experience in that process. So what comes out of that process is each individual has a plan for themselves. We say, put your oxygen mask on first. So everyone comes out more prepared than they were going in to the course, including our government and emergency services who have responsibilities in this place, I can say. The second thing that you come out with is an implementation plan that says, this is how I might move this forward from my role and my position. So whether you're a peer leader or you're an advocate, or maybe you're a service provider, or you're a government emergency planner, whatever role you play in this space, we want you to actually come out with a plan for how you're going to implement it in your practice and promote it where you work. We also encourage people to develop the final assignment or their shared implementation plan as a shared plan, because we want these collaborators to be working together in their local communities and implementing their plans together in the community. So far, we have evaluated the reaction that people have to this course. They love it. In fact, they love it so much, we're going to stop evaluating the reaction to the course. I know it's nice to hear how wonderful it is, but we probably don't need to ask people that question anymore. The next thing we wanted to know was, what do people learn and are they changing their behavior? And we're quite excited to see major improvements in people's preparedness, their willingness, confidence, and capability to prepare others, and also a bit of optimistic realism about where they can start and how ambitious they are to kind of move it forward and keep that momentum going. We're currently in a phase of evaluating where the rubber hits the road. When people go to implement this from whatever hat they wear and whatever role they take on, how is it going? And we're really quite excited about the early implementation that's happening. And I mentioned earlier, and you'll see that logo again, that P-CEP Connect, that's become one of the ways that people are sharing how they're implementing with each other. So much so that it's hard for us to keep track of, but it's a good problem to have. Oh, we've got SCIA takes action. So Tony or Jay, do you guys want to talk about that? Because here's another way SCIA is starting to lead the charge.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, just to let everyone know that we received some funding to do exactly what Michelle has been talking about, and that will be happening very soon. In the next month or two, we hope to start that and generate some interest from everyone, all our members, everyone that's online. We do hope that you'll want to participate in this P-CEP training, and we're hoping to start that pretty soon with just hiring a project officer at the moment. But and we are hoping to make it in person, but also virtual as well. So that gives, I hope, most people an opportunity to join, and depending on what your preferences are. But yeah, we'll be sharing that out fairly soon.
Okay, I think it's my turn. Yeah. So as part of what Tony was just speaking about, we've been working with SCIA to develop a survey, and we'd really love all of you to get involved once it's ready. So by doing the survey, we want to find out more about your everyday capabilities and support needs, and how these might intersect with risks experienced during an extreme weather event or other emergency. So in the survey that we've put together, we've included questions about these 5 things that I'll talk through. So your spinal cord injury or related condition, and we've tried to keep that really broad because we want to hear from all of you. We've got questions on the aids or assistive technology that you use in your everyday life, including whether you need electricity to power these. And we've got a series of questions about mobility and wheelchair use, that are based on internationally validated survey questions. We've got questions on your attitudes about and preparing for events like house fires, heat waves, bushfires, floods and cyclones, including the specific actions that you've taken to prepare for these events. We've got questions on where and who you would go to for information and assistance before or during an event. And of course, some demographic questions, so we can see if people's responses differ by age, background, or where they live. So on the next slide, we've got just a couple of things that we're hoping to achieve by doing the survey. So we will be analysing the data and sharing the results with you. And this will tell you about the capabilities and the support needs of the network and where the gaps are. And there's an opportunity for you to use the information as a foundation for peer support, advocacy and representation. So as a sort of hypothetical example, the data might show that many of you are concerned about the power and reliability of equipment during an emergency, and that finding could shape the conversations and the actions that you take next. So after the survey is closed and we've analysed the data, we can come back to another forum like this to start those conversations. So I'll just finish up on the next slide with some quick logistics about the survey. So we really encourage you to get involved and to complete the survey. And there will be a question included for you to indicate your interest in participating in the P-CEP training that Michelle just talked about. So the survey will go out through the SCIA mailing list in about July or August. So keep an eye out for it there and please do get involved. And I'll hand back to Michelle or Bronwyn now.
This is my quick opportunity, because I said it's all about self-assessing. So I'll give everyone on the line today an opportunity to self-assess your current level of preparedness to the degree that you feel comfortable. You could put the number in the chat, or you could just keep it to yourself and talk about it around the dinner table tonight with close family and friends. But on a number line here, at the far left of the line, it says number 1, I haven't thought about emergency preparedness at all. And at the far right end at number 5, it says, I've reviewed actions and told others. Number 3 in the middle is, I've started to get organized. Number 2, closer down into number 1, says, I thought about it, but not yet acted. And number 4, I've taken actions to get ready. Now, think about that in the extreme sense, though, because disasters can be extreme. So if you're going to think you're at number 5, I'd like you to think that you're the kind of person that has a really comprehensive emergency management plan. You know exactly what you're going to do if you have to stay, if you have to go, or if you have to go quickly, like in a house fire. You've communicated that plan with everybody in your support network, so they know how they're going to act with you. People who you need to support are aware and communicating their plans, and you guys know how you're going to act together. You've got a kit in your car, a kit at work, a kit at home, and you're ready to go. So if you're 5, that's what you are like. And then anywhere in between along that line. I can see some numbers coming in. So as people are reflecting on where they're at and sharing or keeping it quiet where they're feeling they're at, I think it's also really important for us to go, wow, there's a lot of steps to preparedness, and it would be really unfair. If we were today, if you're the person that's sitting at number 2, it would be really unfair to ask you by tomorrow to have that kind of level 5 plan that I've just described. It's totally unfair and completely unrealistic for that to happen. So I think that's a really important part of doing this self-assessment process, where we can go, okay, I know where I'm at now. Now I know the next step that I need to take. And so it's all about what's the next step that you can take. What are the few things within reasonable, feasible control for you that you can take that action to move forward? The other reason it's good to have these kinds of conversations in a group is because, and I'm seeing some 5s come in, if you've got people in a networked group that you're connected to who are at number 5, that means they have a pretty awesome plan and they've probably got some great ideas they can share with you. So I think we need to be picking their brains and leveraging their ideas and their strategies so we can borrow those and put those tips into our own plan or adapt them in a likewise manner. And if you're in a group where people are at the lower end, it might mean you've got a little mutual support to kind of nudge each other along through that process. And I think we've got just one more slide on there to really open it up for reflection and discussion. And we've got some ideas on the slide, which are just what comments do you have? What reflections have you been making over this last while? What questions do you have for us or for SCIA's team on what they're planning to do next? Do you have any questions about the survey? Do you have any questions about the P-CEP certificate or other ways to get involved? And any other questions are fair game. So we'll open it up to you guys.
I was just wondering, does everyone know that Red Cross has got a really good app, the Get Prepared app?
I only discovered that a few weeks ago, and it was the link was on my local council website. But no, prior to that, I certainly didn't know.
Yeah, it is good. It's like it touches on everything, even down to your pets and your contacts and having your insurance and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really good app to have. That's if you.
Are you aware of that, Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear that some people are accessing and using that app because they got that app up and running from their Red Cross Ready Plan efforts and have been learning alongside our team because Red Cross have been across all of our projects on advisories all the way along. So it's really exciting to see the work that Red Cross is doing in the preparedness space. They have normally seen themselves as kind of a response agency, and it's been exciting to see them increasing their efforts toward preparedness and resilience resources. They're actually working with us and Country Fire Authority in Victoria. If there's anyone online from Victoria, there's a program that we're rolling out to deliver person-centered emergency preparedness in partnership with Country Fire Authority staff and Red Cross volunteers, as well as some SES volunteers, in a number of local government areas across Victoria. So if you live or know people who want support to make a plan, they're there to do a home safety visit and walk through that process with you and help you get started. Thanks, Tanya.
Anyone else got any questions or comments? Yes, Dawn.
Hi, I'm shocked at how not prepared I am. You know, I thought, oh yeah, I've considered these things, but actually it's shocking to me the detail that you need to go into. So I'm very grateful for this discussion and forum and what's coming next. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And hopefully just motivated enough, not overwhelmed, Dawn.
I think, Dawn, the majority, I'm guessing. I noticed there was a couple of people on 5, and that's impressive. But yeah, I know myself, I was definitely at a maximum 2 before doing the course, and only now I would say I'm sitting at 3. So yeah. Jade.
Yeah, I guess I just want to comment this as somebody that's done the course as well. So for a bit of background about me, I'm legally blind, and I have in fact been caught in a bushfire situation, and I was amazed at how unprepared my family and I were for that situation. Just, I guess, me and my guide dog threw an absolute spanner in the works for my poor family. And I did the course last year, and now I'm at stage 3 where I've started to actually get organized for any kind of disaster that I could possibly come across. So if you I guess if you are interested in doing that course, I 100% recommend, because it's a lot of information to take in, but it's, I guess, not only given me the skills to facilitate some P-CEP training, but it's also given me the skills to put my own oxygen mask on as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Jade. Any final comments from your team, Michelle, in terms of the course and resources?
Oh, I'm just wondering, I know Jade has been quietly listening in the background, but Jade, not to put you on the spot, this is Jade Cheng I'm speaking to. Not to put you on the spot, Jade, but maybe you want to reflect a little bit about the evaluation, being the person on the other end of the computer, crunching all the data about the course. Like, yeah, what are you learning?
Well, I think the evaluation show very positive improvement before and after the course. There's a significant change, improvement in terms of people's attitudes, their skills, their knowledge. Just 1 month, the course take 1 month and be able to see such a significant improvement. It's really kind of, I think we are doing the right thing in the right way.
If I could speak, I've been caught in bushfires here in 2019, and I don't think anyone was really aware how bad that was going to be. And they took around 30 houses out around my area where I grew up, and that was at Bobe and Marlee. I'm John Greenville Wingham, and the people that panicked, that was just normal without being in a wheelchair or being in having any type of disability, was amazing. Now, I've spent most of my life in the bushfire brigade up until I went away to work, and I've been a lot of fires and been seeing a lot of floods in my area, because we've got the Manning River here as well, that we have a lot of floods. And it's, in some ways, it's virtually impossible to be at the number 5 stage, but you can be just the best you can be. And like it's been very hard to get up to that type of stage. Even myself, I'd only class myself as a stage 4 or even a 3-4, and I've been looking at this since I've virtually come home, having electricity, fires or floods, having all that type of stuff, being well prepared for heat waves and all that type of stuff. But, when it comes down to it, it's so hard to be properly prepared for any of these type of situations, and people do panic. We all panic. And that's one thing I've learned. A lot of people panic, and that's able-bodied or disabled.
And I have a question for you, John. And how have you found support structures in managing that and preparing? Has that been
it's
a
very
smooth
hard
process, or
it's a very slow process? Even with the Taree Council, that's just super slow in getting anything passed, or everything's. I'm very frustrated in the council. I can put it that way, because nothing just flows with them. And councils, I don't know if it's just our council, every council the same. There's so many legal hoops they jump through and got to look at, where it could be made a lot easier with, I understand confidentiality and all that type of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that's, just stupid. I looked at trying to getting some way that our fire brigades, our SCS and all them places had phone numbers, had contacts, and that, especially because I live in a bush area. I don't at the moment, but I grew up in a bush area and I still class that as home. It's only about 15 kilometres up the road. So it's, you know, I grew up in farming and dairy farming and a lot of trees and a lot of bush area. So I was very used to fires, and it's just, it's frustrating with councils, sometimes services. They just don't understand it until the situation happens. You know, they just don't get it until they have the problem that they have clients in bad situations or in that type of, pardon me, in that type of situation. Yeah, I found super frustrating in some ways, yes. Even educating your own company, it can be frustrating as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, John. Michelle?
I just wanted to follow on with John's comment, because councils are also, you know, overwhelmed at how to get started, but I am excited that huge numbers of them are getting on board. They know this is a problem. They know something needs to change, and it needs to change quickly. So we do have some champions emerging. They have their own barriers. Some of those barriers are that the disability inclusion access and the emergency management planning sides of council don't often, you know, communicate with each other. That's a problem initially. Some of the other challenges we've already talked about, which is those people who are in charge of planning may not have plans themselves or really understand the additional and extra support needs of people with disability to help manage that. One thing we did as a research team with for the National Emergency Management Agency was a scoping study. And one piece of that scoping study was to actually look at the state level emergency management plans. So the head document that at a state level, the arrangements kind of look to how we're going to respond, and a sample of local government emergency management plans in regions where there was high disaster risk and high prevalence of incidence of people with disability. What we found from that study, I can say, is disappointing. Disability is either not mentioned in the plans, or when it is, people with disability are referred to as, you know, having deficits and being vulnerable, and there's a sense of doing entirely for people with disability. That's really quite untenable, and it's obviously in direct contrast with what we want to happen, people being in the driver's seat, being part of that planning process and supporting the plans. The exciting part of doing a study like that is being able to share it and support that change making process. So we're looking forward to councils now starting to, you know, with that baseline in mind, improving their actions from here forward. So hopefully, I know it'll be frustrating for a while, John, but hopefully over time we'll see that part of the change.
Yeah, I'm trying hard, but yes, it is very frustrating, and it's like I just love to just get a little bit more ahead in my yard actually at the moment, because if we do have another 2019 and that, I don't think our area it'll be another disaster, a bad disaster again. And yeah, we just don't need that type of problems. But yeah, I'm working on it. That's all I can say. I'm trying to work on it. And I'll be happy to be included in the spinal cord if they would like me to be included in that to help them with their disaster. Because as I said, I grew up bushfires and floods and that, and I work on electricity and I've done all that type of work. So it kind of ticks a few boxes to help. So yeah.
Terrific.
So, yeah.
Thanks, John. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, I guess I just want to say thanks to Bronwyn, Michelle, Bridget, and Jade. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us today. And I hope that you all go away and have these like reflective moments. Usually what happens in a conversation like this is people think about all these kinds of things, you know, 24 hours and more later. So it'd be great if you guys have questions or comments to channel back in through SCIA. Don't hesitate.
Terrific. And so just wanted to mention again the survey that Michelle's team is preparing, and we hope that we'll get that out soon. Sorry, I should hand back to you, Jade. Over to you, Jade. Apologies.
No worries. Thank you, Michelle, Bridget, Bronwyn, and Jade for joining us today and giving us that wonderful, informative presentation. I feel like I always learn something new every time I talk to you guys. Yeah, we were going to have a chat about the survey, but that's already been discussed. And we will be running some in-person and hopefully virtual P-CEP workshops through Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. I believe the in-person ones, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, will be up in the Northern Rivers, the Hunter region and the Illawarra region, and hopefully we can expand that out over time through virtual workshops as well. I was trying to think of the word there. Also, our next network forum will be on the 2nd of August, and we'll be focusing on health and well-being and mental health for people living with spinal cord and neurological disabilities, or any disability really. So we hope that you can all join us for that as well.
Yeah, just the last comment on that. There is a SCIA health maintenance tool which Tanya will be very familiar with because she helped develop it, and it's now been digitized, and it's just being launched or is about to be launched. And there is a new module on it on mental health. So we'll that'll be our topic area for the next forum coming up. So we hope to all see you there.